Hello and welcome. The internet, how can it strengthen democracy? That's what we're going to take a close look at right now. And this being a session on the internet, we will of course urge all of you to write in, tweet to us, comment in every possible way that you can. The hashtag, of course, is hashtag NDTV25, so you can tweet on that or do whatever else. And of course, second screen. So open the NDTV app, which I'm sure all of you have by now. Tap on second screen, post your questions, vote questions up and down. We'll ask whatever it is that you actually want us to ask. And the panel that we have, well, I have to say, I've rarely seen such an illustrious panel to discuss the internet and where it's going to go. I'm going to start with Omar Abdullah, Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, somebody who uses the internet to connect with his electorate and with a lot more besides. Swapan Das Gupta, senior journalist, political commentator, also uses Twitter and other forums to actually engage a lot. Rajan Anandan, the head of Google India, is going to really lay down the roadmap for what exactly is going to happen on the internet, because if Google's not doing it, it's probably not happening, right, Rajan? It's great to have Professor Ashutosh Varshney, Saul Goldman Professor of International Studies at the Brown University. Suhel, Seth, whose opinions are loud and well known, whether it's on the internet or off the internet, Suhel, so we'll get some of those from you as we go along. Naina, Kidwai, President FICCI, country head HSBC, and Shekhar Gupta, of the Indian Express. It's great to have all of you with us. Why don't I just quickly start off by laying some of the possible themes on which the internet can actually impact democracy, and I want to get each of you to expand on that list. From communicating and being able to talk directly to the electorate, that's one. From being able to deliver more services to people at a wider level, that's a second. And I'm sure there are other areas also where the internet can have an impact, including perhaps raising funds now from parties like the Aam Aadmi Party. Omar?
Well, I think in the first one, it's not so much us communicating with the people. It's the reverse. We've always communicated with people, but that communication has been largely one-sided. We have stood up on podiums and delivered speeches, but not really heard what the people had to say. Facebook, Twitter, Google Hangouts, stuff like that has actually reversed the flow of communication. We now listen through what people tweet, what they write on our Facebook walls, and we get a more direct sense of what the people are thinking than the otherwise filtered communication that we were exposed to earlier. So it's not like we are still communicating. I think it's as you could call the Aam Janta that is now sort of talking back to us. Is
the response sometimes skewed because it said that there are certain people who are dominating the internet, who are more vociferous than the others?
Well, there's no doubt that as of now, the internet seems to be, at least some of the social media space seems to be skewed in a particular direction. But that is changing. There is more and more voice of reason that is being heard. That's not to say that the voice of reason doesn't get drowned out when the noise starts. But if you can filter through the noise, there is a lot more reasonable comment that is available should you choose to look for it.
Okay. Swapan? A lot of reasonable feedback coming in also. I mean, sometimes it can be, I've heard you described as a raving lefty on occasions on the internet.
Yeah, well, I think it's more subtlety doesn't work on social media very considerably. But I take issue with Omar on one thing. I don't think necessarily it's the voice of reason which has got subsumed. What I think has happened is that because of the sheer newness of the media, and the ability of a lot of ordinary people who hitherto considered themselves voiceless, I think there is a great deal of insolence and anger which as a result of this has generated itself. And the mere fact that Omar will actually be possibly reading, and he's one of the very handful of politicians who actually not only does his own tweets, but who also probably reads them. Most of them outsource it to their secretaries or things. So that we must qualify the nature of the interaction is still rather imperfect. But I think it's really the newness of the media has allowed a lot of people to vent their anger. And that anger is not necessarily always couched in the most diplomatic of language, nor is it necessarily couched in the language of political correctness. And I think that would probably gall a lot of people, and hence the discomfiture of a lot of more established citizenry to this new media.
All right. Rajan, It was said till now that the internet, whenever you're talking about using the internet to connect with the masses, you're talking about a small section. It's the elite. It doesn't really affect people. Now that's starting to change, and I have to say Android and things like that are also having a massive impact. And as in the next year or two, the price of Android-enabled smartphones starts to drop down to, let's say, the $50 mark, you could perhaps have an explosion of connected people who can then continue to communicate in the ways that you were talking about.
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, I think it's important to keep in mind we already have 200 million Indians on the internet. India is adding 3 to 4 million internet users a month. So essentially by the election time, we will have almost 240 million Indians on the internet. Over 70% of registered voters in urban India are already on the internet, right? I think there's a lot of discussion today about Indians giving feedback, a lot of chatter, maybe negative chatter. Actually, that's not the point. I think what's happening, we've done a lot of research on this topic, and what we found is a large number of Indians are doing research about political parties, about politicians, about local issues, and they're becoming aware. A small minority of them are actually voicing their opinion. That's actually not what's really going on. What's happening is, they're doing extensive amounts of research about what political parties stand for, about what specific politicians and candidates stand for, and also trying to understand how much progress is being made. And by doing that research, they're becoming more informed, they're making decisions, and a very small majority of them are being vocal. So I think there's a lot of media attention, and I think political parties and organizations are being are focusing on all the chatter, if I might call it. Actually, that's not the point. The point is hundreds of millions of Indians are making decisions based on information that they're getting. And I think the other thing that we found, we published this research a couple of months ago, actually, Vikram, together with you. A large number of them are undecided. And the reason they're undecided is because they have yet not got the kind of information, or they don't like what they're hearing, right? And I think this is no longer niche. It's not about a 10, 20, 30, 40 million people on the internet, on social networks. It's about 200 million plus 3 to 4 million added every month who are now engaged deeply in understanding what these parties stand for, political parties stand for. So I think it's pretty profound.
And they may make their voting decisions based on what they find on the...
Well, I think we've already seen that, actually. Our view is, it's amazing. We've been tracking internet behavior over the last 6 to 8 weeks. It is amazing what is happening.
Professor Varshney.
A slight disagreement with that. And here is, I think, one way to think about it. So there are 200 million internet users in India. Only 25 million in rural India. So there is right away an urban-rural gap. India is still primarily rural, 68% demographically, and because rural India has tended to vote more than urban India in the last 20 years, which may change, electorally the rural weight is about 75%, not 68%, and perhaps higher. That part of India has not been penetrated by the internet. So this is an urban phenomenon, and actually urban middle class phenomenon. If the estimated size of Indian middle class is 300, 200 to 225 are using the internet at this point, so about 70% of that. So no, we are not reaching the urban poor, and we are not reaching the countryside yet through the internet. It may change in 5 years and 10 years.
Rajan, could I get a reaction from that? I mean, certainly if you were talking about the internet being based on PCs and laptops and desktops, that would almost certainly be the case in the foreseeable future. So is what he's saying changing now with Android phones?
Basically, yeah. So you're absolutely right. Today it is an urban phenomenon. Actually, the number is more like 50 million are outside of the, are from rural India. But what is happening? Well, firstly, you could debate whether 250 million connected Indians who are deeply connected can swing an election or not, right? I mean, I think that's for, I'm not in that business. That's for, I think, political parties to decide whether they cannot. Our view, but the data we are seeing is probably sure. What happened in Delhi, right? Lots of things happen in Delhi, but clearly this is an urban city that is highly connected. Not every place is like Delhi. The other thing that's happening, you have to keep in mind, of the 4 million Indians who are coming to the internet every month, 70% are not from metros. So every single day, we're having millions of Indians from outside of the metros that are connecting the internet. So that probably, you're absolutely right, may not make a difference by 2014. But if you fast forward another 4 years,
yes,
you're talking about 5 to 600 million Indians connected onto the internet, and then we are clearly getting to that number of 750 million registered voters.
I do agree that by 2019, by the time we have next elections, this would be a very significant phenomenon.
Okay. So before I come to you, Shekhar, in your journeys, when you are looking at the writings in the world, as it were, do you see a major impact of the internet at this stage, or is it restricted to a few big cities?
Well, nobody can say that there isn't a major impact, but there won't be a major impact. But I think we are also going through a phase where we are presuming too much, as if internet is not the means to an end, but an end in itself. You know, even if I may steal the title of a book, I think all of us are also victims of the net delusion, a little bit. And if you studied a bit more, then you hear other terms like cyber utopianism. In 2010, the Nobel Committee did not raise an eyebrow when Wired magazine named internet as a nominee for Nobel Prize. And what inspired that? What inspired that was the euphoria from Iran. And somehow, because Iranians were tweeting their anger against the regime was going to be upturned, and soon Iran was going to have a revolution. Nothing of the sort happened. It's taken 4 years for Iran to get some reform and change. And it's happened the old-fashioned democratic way, where coalitions have been built, where people have been persuaded, where arguments have been made in public. So sometimes because we live in this echo chamber, in fact, in terms of the media, I worry a little bit about the impact it's having on us. It's making us much more conscious, for example, of our internet audiences, of our Twitter audiences. And I find more and more of us sometimes get worried about what response will I get on Twitter. In fact, I sometimes say, I'm probably not the best person to speak about this, because I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on Facebook, I'm betraying the fact that I'm not so digitally savvy, which is very bad, which is a black mark on your CV these days. But the fact is that any time my ego gets a little bloated with praise, all I have to do is to go to Twitter, and I figure out in 5 minutes what a low life I am, right? So it's useful because, you know, as Omar said, a lot of people who could not get to you directly now get to you directly, and they don't have to wait to make a phone call to you or send you an email. So it is an instrument of democracy. It's also an instrument of trouble. I'll give you one example, which is very current. The Tehelka sexual assault case would not have reached where it has reached if there was no email. Email is possible because of internet. Yet, it's only because of internet that so many scoundrels in this country and in other countries also have dared to try and out the victim's identity, right? Yeah. In no other medium would anybody dare to do it. But internet gives people the feeling that nobody will find out. And I think the problem with internet, and where it becomes a threat to democracy and free speech and free discussion, and in fact sometimes even becomes an instrument of fascism, is that it gives you anonymity. And anonymity brings out the worst in human beings. So you know, Facebook likes can be bought, as we now know. Twitter praise or Twitter attacks can also be organized, as we now know, right? So these are issues that we'll have to deal with. And I do not believe, I mean, look at the people who come and listen to Narendra Modi in Gandhi Maidan. They were not influenced by internet. Or think of all the resettlement colonies of Delhi or the poor of Delhi who've now voted in such large numbers for Aam Aadmi Party, deserting Congress Party. They were not influenced by internet. So politics will still be done the old-fashioned way. Internet will have influence, but people will know that internet is a partisan medium as of now.
Right. So here, the threats of anonymity, which can actually end up being a problem in democracy, and perhaps slightly related to this, a question which is coming in on second screen from Manish. Will government surveillance on the internet be a threat to democracy? So that's one of the questions from NDTV second screen, which is just coming.
Well, certainly not the Indian government, because you know, they're not so adept yet. But I want to come back to the point that Shekhar touched upon. I genuinely believe that we're giving the internet too much of importance. It's a tool of information, perhaps empowerment, but it's certainly not going to strengthen your democracy in a manner of speaking. A, because it keeps a lot more people out than in. B, in its current form, it is being used, as Shekhar and some others mentioned, it's being used as a tool of hatred at times, as a tool of ridicule. You had a situation where the former Rajasthan Chief Minister, poor guy, actually bought followers from Turkey. So he may have won an election in Istanbul, he certainly lost one in Jaipur. So, you know, you have these oddities. So it's very interesting to sit here and say, oh, will the internet change our democracy? It won't. Electoral reforms will change our democracy. Do you think the louts who end up in parliament because of all the stuff that they do, you know, transparent, honest people, do you think they really care about the internet? The fact that Rahul Gandhi is not on Twitter, is not on Facebook, I mean, the only similarity he shares with Shekhar, is a statement in itself. Not that he doesn't believe in social media, but he doesn't believe it's relevant in current day politics. So I think we're giving it far more importance than it deserves.
But Professor Varshney, you were making a point just before we started the session that actually there can be another impact of the internet, that you can actually find ways of raising electoral funding, as we have seen recently, which gives people the chance to come out and contest and without having access to money bags.
Yeah, so we have a famous banker here we could ask, but here is the idea that in the American political space, a lot of funding today, electoral funding, is through the internet. You give your credit card number. There are not that many credit card users in India, but debit cards, probably 300 million or so. So you give your debit card number, it goes to an electoral account, and if everyone pays, let's say, $10, and let's say 200 million people pay $10, that's a lot of money right away. And that's clean money with perfect records. So this is certainly an idea for the future. It can catch fire. As more and more people bank in India, as in more and more people have debit cards in India, internet can be used for campaign finance.
And let me get you in on that point. And also the other related issue that many people say is that where the internet does help overall in the country and therefore in democracy is being able to keep a cleaner eye on things, e-governance, make things more transparent, put all land records on the internet and allow people to access it. Still a long way, I think, in this country before we really get there, but is that something you're starting to see happen?
I think it's a very important tool and one which really delivers our democratic rights and ones that we can't ignore. So if you look at the fact that today a courier company can actually give you the exact status of where its parcel is, we should be able to do the same thing for every file that applies to us, for every application, and the transparency it brings. You then begin to think about, well, rural India, and if there isn't the connect, what do you do? Well, what we're beginning to do in banks, for example, is use handheld devices. So the person at the other end may not have access, but the person who's delivering the service can provide that access. So if you look at it as a whole bunch of, banking correspondents, as they're called, and salespeople, if it is to do with products, are out there being able to connect people. And frankly, civil society, NGOs could do the same. For every individual that's made an application, if you had, whether it was the old sort of phone booth idea or handheld devices, you could actually provide this service to everyone in terms of how they connect back with the official system. Because if you think of how every farmer would waste so much time, I mean, statistics show he would pedal his way into some center for a day, camp there for 3 days, be sent back, come back again to get what is a very simple application sorted out. Imagine the service you could provide by taking it to him where he exists. Okay. And let alone all the communication and all those other advantages as well.
Okay, I'm about to turn to the audience to start getting some questions from there as well. But Omar, you want to just respond to that, seeing as you're the only person out here who's actually running something in the
I think the mistake we make is to automatically assume the internet just means Twitter and Facebook.
Yeah, absolutely.
For governance, there is so much. We're talking about strengthening democracy. I mean, communication is a vital part of democracy, no doubt about that. But so is governance. And the internet makes a huge difference to the quality of governance should you use it. I mean, in my state, we are currently experimenting with an Android-based project monitoring system for projects that are taking place near the border areas. Now, this is where you'll click a photograph of a project in progress. It'll have a GPS stamp, a time and date stamp, so nobody can fudge records. And sitting in Srinagar, I can ask a particular officer in an area to take a photograph of the current status of a project, and I will know exactly what is happening in that area. Now, this empowers better decision making. It empowers the government to ensure accountability. And I think this makes a huge difference to the quality of governance and in turn to democracy. So let's not confuse the internet only with Facebook and Twitter. I mean, there is a whole lot of other aspects that can be used that will make a difference.